I've got a confession to make. It pains me to say that over the course of the last decade, I've lost touch with RPGs. To be honest, you wouldn't be wrong to assume that there are many genres of video games I'm not interested in after taking a look at my favorites. But it hurts to have to admit that I've neglected a genre that has played an integral role in fostering my love for storytelling and characterization, because I've always attributed the JRPG subgenre with immense historical importance. Alongside Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda were Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, just as importantly revolutionizing the video game industry during the dawn of its revival. The difference? I didn't really grow up with the classics that defined what it meant to be a JRPG. For a long time, my understanding of the genre was largely informed by a handful of experiences leading up to a time where Japanese developed games were scrutinized for obtuse design choices that failed to connect with Western audiences.
I suck. I'm sorry.
This limited scope reinforced certain stereotypes I believed were pertinent to the genre, causing me to write off JRPGs as a whole for the better part of a decade. That is, until recently. In response to my own genre fatigue, I decided to try out a game that appeared to be a little more tailored to my own tastes and had the potential to shift my perspective. It's a product of three of the greatest minds in the industry coming together to create something unique and special during an era that was already considered a golden age for JRPGs. Even with the shred of optimism I already had going in, it shattered my expectations, leading me to reassess what a JRPG really is. That game could be none other than Chrono Trigger. But before digging deeper into Chrono Trigger, we need to discuss what led me to believe I would never play another JRPG. Most RPGs are way different than the types of games I found myself spending most of my time playing over the last few years. I grew up mostly playing games that were light on story and focused on delivering fast-paced, satisfying traversal and real-time action combat to the player. I've stuck to these types of games for most of my life, appreciating how easy they are to pick up and play as an adult when my time has become more and more precious to me. As such, I often struggle when trying to commit to a game whose value may be contingent upon the amount of commitment I'm willing to put into it. And interestingly enough, my preferred taste has narrowed significantly in spite of an increase in accessibility to new experiences. But it wasn't always like this, especially with RPGs. This is because, as a child, what became a part of my video game library was at the mercy of what my family was willing to provide me, leaving me more likely to engage with new experiences. This introduced me to games like Paper Mario and the Pokemon series, which acquainted me with the concept of a JRPG, but it wasn't until the late stages of the PlayStation 2's life cycle did I encounter my first formative experience with what I would describe as a traditional JRPG. That was Final Fantasy X, and it was daunting to say the least. I initially struggled to connect with it because of how strong a departure it was from the SNES and N64 platformers I was fluent in. The introductory cutscene certainly did its job, drawing me into the story and preparing me for the action, but the pace of the gameplay didn't exactly live up to those expectations. I immediately felt out of my element in the face of its combat and level progression. For whatever reason, I remember somehow failing to understand how the sphere grid worked, instead choosing to ignore it entirely. That didn't work out too well for me. Despite such a poor initial experience, I maintained an on and off relationship with the game over the following years, which gave me more time to revisit it, understanding it a little more each time. And what I came to realize was that the gameplay acted as merely a vessel for portraying an incredibly unique approach to storytelling. Final Fantasy X, above all else, is a story about intertwining character growth. Each of the party's members have their own baggage to deal with, from the plot defining to the insignificant. For example, one of my favorites is Kimahri, a character who has been ostracized from his tribe. His growth as he commits to serving Yuna as a guardian plays a pretty insignificant role to the overall story, but his mysterious presence encouraged me to want to learn more about him. Fighting alongside Kimahri and watching him do everything in his power to protect Yuna made the moments where he chose to speak, where he chose to reveal just a little more about himself, all the more compelling. For me, it was never really about the overall narrative, but the characters Titus and Yuna surrounded themselves with and how they interacted with each other over the course of the game. It's for this reason that Final Fantasy X has stuck with me since I completed it, and what I believe is a fundamental strength of the JRPG genre, a willingness to dig deep into character-driven storytelling. After completing Final Fantasy X, I wanted to experience more games like it, but I ran into so many issues with those that followed. Whether it was feeling so perpetually underleveled in Final Fantasy XII that I had a better experience beginning a new playthrough after 30 hours to focus on 3 characters instead of all 6, or struggling with Ni no Kuni's overly complex battle system that became way too reliant on its vague AI control a third of the way through the game, these games were plagued with mechanical issues that bogged down the stories they wanted to tell. I think the most painful part of that experience looking back was the fact that while increasingly inaccessible gameplay changes were becoming the norm, the games I enjoyed most, like Final Fantasy X and Lost Odyssey, felt more like exceptions to the rule rather than an actual progression of the genre. The Final Fantasy series has without a doubt been going through growing pains ever since the release of X, and the mixed responses to its fundamental changes are, for better or worse, indicative of its genre's reputation in the public eye. It certainly had an effect on me, reinforcing my belief of certain JRPG stereotypes. Their drawn-out introductions just take too long to get the ball rolling. There's too much downtime between events that push the story forward. Turn-based and real-time RPG combat alike are just mindless mash-throughs, and random encounters are purely designed to waste your time. Regardless of any of it being true or not, I began to feel disillusioned with the genre after being burned repeatedly by games with seemingly glaring holes in their design. Perhaps the most tragic part of it all is that instead of looking back to the past, I naively believed that I would never play another JRPG ever again. And for a while, I didn't. I gave up full stop, and for years committed to only playing games I was sure to enjoy. Games that I felt would better respect my time and were more familiar. This was when my obsession with speedrunning and competitive gaming took over. Constantly replaying my favorite games in a new context ensured that I never felt burned by new experiences. But perhaps, ironically, that is what led me to consider playing another JRPG for the first time in years. I began to experience fatigue playing nothing but the fast-paced, mechanically demanding games I was most familiar with. Sure enough, a desire to play something completely different is what finally brought me to Chrono Trigger. Ever since I completed this game, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. When considering which JRPG I wanted to play in an effort to become reacquainted with the genre, I settled on Chrono Trigger for a couple of reasons. For one, I was enticed by its condensed length compared to other games I was familiar with. But more importantly, I was intrigued by the prospect of playing the final product of what was perhaps the most anticipated project of its time. A super collaboration known as the Dream Project between the fathers of the JRPG, Hironobu Sakaguchi and Yuji Horii, as well as prolific manga artist and character designer Akira Toriyama. It is astounding to think how much Chrono Trigger blew away my expectations, because it feels like a response to all of the criticisms I have regarding JRPG accessibility until you consider the fact that this game was released a decade before any of the games that fed me these stereotypes. A combination of interwoven factors have led me to believe that this game is just short of being perfect, and for the foreseeable future will rank at the top of my list of recommendations for players who are new to the genre. This is because making the game accessible to new players was a direct focus of the project, according to Sakaguchi, and this design philosophy affected every aspect of its development. For one, there is never a dull moment in Chrono Trigger. From the outset, you're given complete freedom to explore the overworld and through various time periods, no less. But it's so contained and effectively gated that there's little chance of feeling overwhelmed and directionless. It's a world that's actually quite small, yet feels massive and full of discovery because time-traveling capabilities gradually open up over the course of the game, allowing you to explore in so many different contexts. From the undeveloped prehistoric era to the post-apocalyptic future, it's littered with story beats that are consistently accompanied by a sense of shock and wonder. Within minutes of its introduction, it not only sets up its first plot device, which is little more than chase a cute girl through a time portal, it establishes intrigue in its world by presenting it within multiple contexts without regard for overbearing exposition. Perhaps its most iconic scene, the trial, does an incredible job subverting expectations while reframing the player's actions in direct contrast with their intent. After traveling back in time with Luca to save both the Queen of the Past and Princess of the Present, ensuring the fabric of history remains uninterrupted, Chrono is charged with abduction of the princess and put on trial after returning to the present. The court proceedings are hilarious, and these two events are juxtaposed so cleverly that I couldn't help but repeatedly burst out in laughter in spite of the severity of the situation. This scene culminates in a hilariously satisfying moment following an intense boss fight versus the Dragon Tank. It's what Chrono Trigger does time and time again so expertly, using time to craft an engaging, self-aware narrative with impactful moments that isn't afraid to just have some fun. Before long, the party finds themselves momentarily trapped in a post-apocalyptic future where it's revealed that Lavos, a seemingly unstoppable force, emerged from the core of the earth to decimate all civilization, leaving it in the wasteland-like state they discovered it in. Suddenly, a fairly straightforward and unassuming story begins to show its complexity as the main scenario is presented. Chrono and his friends decide to try and stop Lavos by trying to piece together a timeline of the events that led to the Earth's destruction. Perhaps this is because I've managed to avoid being overexposed to time travel plotlines, but I found this approach so enthralling. The events of the main plot present the player with a number of questions that are answered by following threads through various time periods. Solving its mysteries felt incredibly satisfying because the chronology of the game is presented to the player in mismatched pieces encompassing the plots of characters across all the different time periods that decide to help you. My favorite has got to be Frog. The first time Chrono encounters him is in the 600 AD era, where he assists Chrono and Luca in their mission to rescue the Queen. After safely returning the Queen to the castle, however, he abandons the party, disgraced for having allowed her to be placed in danger in the first place. It isn't until Chrono returns with a Masamune, a sword that required traveling through 3 different eras of time to repair, that he decides to rejoin the party as you receive glimpses into his tragic backstory. Through a series of cutscenes, it's revealed that Frog was never a frog in the first place, but a young man named Glenn, cursed by the Fiend Lord after watching his beloved friend and companion Cyrus destroyed before him. His backstory suggests that he never wanted to be a hero, perfectly content with remaining a squire to Cyrus until being forced to retaliate. I think part of what makes Frog such a compelling character to me is the fact that he's a bit of a reluctant hero, easily receiving the most attention of the supporting characters. It's this type of side character development I crave from JRPG stories. When Chrono meets Frog for the second time, instead of immediately rejoining the party, the invitation is met with reluctance as he struggles to deal with his own baggage. It's only through his interactions with the other characters that he musters the courage and understanding of how important a role he plays in the story, resolving his inner conflict with the help of new friends. It reminds me of Kimari and all the other characters I gradually learned to love over the course of Final Fantasy X's story. Frog is merely one character in a story with a lot of moving pieces, but that's what's so special about him. I'm sure there's plenty of other players who prefer Luca or Marl or even Robo and Ayla, and that's awesome. But for me, there's something about Frog I just really resonate with. Story aside, there's something so immediately badass about this old English-speaking frog with a giant sword having such an integral presence. It's where Toriyama's influence really shines through, and it helps that Frog is one of my favorite characters to use in battle. His balanced playstyle fit well with the identity I wanted to craft within a system that promotes adaptability while still remaining incredibly accessible. Combat is perhaps the one aspect of a JRPG I have been least likely to connect with, evident by the varying levels of frustration I've endured within other games in the genre. While Chrono Trigger's combat proposed a bit of a learning curve for me, I quickly grew to appreciate how harmoniously all of its individual elements come together to create an equally strategic and charming experience. I particularly love its abandonment of Final Fantasy's iconic random encounters, instead featuring a system where enemies are both encountered and fought in the same environment. I've always preferred this type of system to random encounters because it allows the player to choose whether they want to engage with or avoid a fight, but more importantly, it contextualizes battles within the world. Chrono Trigger was one of the first RPGs to not only abandon random encounters, but according to Secret of Mana producer Hiromichi Tanaka, seamlessly make the action visible in the field without the need to make a transition into a battle screen. While Secret of Mana had it beat in this regard by a couple of years, Chrono Trigger was certainly the first to feature an effective marriage of both contextualized combat encounters and turn-based combat. The backbone of Chrono Trigger's combat is the active time battle, a variant of turn-based combat featuring time gauges that dictate when party members can take action in place of something truly turn-based. Admittedly, it's a system I've struggled to come to grips with in other games, having only dealt with it during an extremely brief stint with Final Fantasy VII. On a base level, I prefer the true turn-based combat featured in the likes of Final Fantasy X because it allows the player to strategically plan out every move without pressure-forcing mistakes. Being attacked repeatedly by enemies while trying to navigate menus and plan out strategies is honestly more frustrating than it is challenging. But after playing Chrono Trigger, with a little tweaking, I've come to really appreciate the tension and depth this system provides. Switching from active battle to wait, an option common in RPGs with an ATB system, most often mirrors something more traditionally turn-based that deflates most of the pressure the ATB offers. But in Chrono Trigger, the necessity to combo certain abilities called text between party members ensures that the ATB gauges serve a purpose while allowing the player time to develop strategies. For instance, instead of falling into strictly defined archetypes like speed or defense-based physical attackers and destructive or supportive magic casters, each party member in Chrono Trigger is equipped with a more balanced set of techs that allows the player to build their party around characters they like using the most while leveraging combos for maximum effectiveness. Rather than relying on all-out aggression or discovering enemy weaknesses to exploit, my playstyle throughout most of the game was extremely support-based, outlasting tough encounters with strong healing and utility. For this reason, I built mostly around Marle. She has access to easily the strongest single-target healing abilities in the game with only one core weakness: a lack of multi-target healing. Aura Whirl, a dual tech shared between Marle and Chrono, heals the entire party, effectively covering that weakness, and I relied on it throughout my entire playthrough. The catch being that these characters needed to be in sync to utilize its effectiveness. This added a predictive and reactive element to the combat that I don't believe a true turn-based system would be able to provide. In anticipation of receiving high damage attacks, instead of having Marle perform a largely ineffective action, I would choose to have her do nothing at all until Chrono was ready to perform in Aura Whirl. Timing this dual tech was tricky though, because having both Chrono and Marle inactive for extended periods of the fight meant that it would probably never end. So careful levels of planning were necessary to weave raw damage combos or elemental attacks in with the healing required to sustain through the toughest fights in the game. It's a balancing act I found as satisfying to pull off as it was to watch the beautifully detailed animations of the dual techs and triptychs play out. While a lot of techs ended up feeling redundant in their effectiveness, I couldn't help but want to experiment with them anyways, merely to bask in the sheer spectacle of it all. Watching the characters interact with each other in battle to this degree of detail honestly blew my mind, with the consideration that this game was originally released on the SNES, and it played a significant role in deciding which characters I utilized most in combat. With a reliance on Marle's healing and Chrono being the mandatory face of the party throughout most of the game, that meant that the final spot was usually filled by Frog or whichever character became the most relevant for story reasons. This, however, presents a potential problem: an unequal balance of power in the party. This isn't really a unique problem to have in an RPG that features more playable characters than there are slots on the battlefield, but if left unaddressed, it can lead to some incredibly frustrating balance. Chrono Trigger, however, deals with this in a relatively simple yet clever way. Similarly to how the EXP share works in the Pokemon series, an inactive party member's level will continue to scale up with those bearing the actual brunt of battle, but it comes at a cost. While their levels and stats will continue to scale with the active party, inactive members will not gain tech points, thus losing access to their strongest abilities. It's a system I imagine has received its fair share of criticisms. On one hand, being gated off from using certain abilities can feel too punishing to actually encourage players to utilize inactive members. But on the other, I appreciate that there's still progression to be found in having to actually utilize characters a little more than their niche would encourage. At the end of the day, it's a serviceable solution to one of the biggest problems I have with JRPG progression. And during my time playing Chrono Trigger, I was certainly able to guarantee effectiveness out of most of the characters while still being able to rely on the party's core identity. When access to various elemental magic was needed, I subbed in Luca. When all-out physical attack was necessary, I brought in Ayla. And when I wasn't sure exactly what I was up against, I relied on Frog to supplement both Marl's healing and Chrono's attack power. The only major critique I have with this system is that I wish party members could be swapped during battle. It would have gone a long way in ensuring niche members their time in the spotlight, especially when an elemental advantage was necessary. But as it is, I was forced to either purposefully fail boss fights to restart with the correct party member, or brute force my way through the encounter, most often settling for the latter option. Despite any criticisms I have with some of its systems that have not aged as well as what would succeed it, Chrono Trigger was exactly the kind of JRPG I needed to play to become reinvigorated with the genre. And in a lot of ways, my experience playing it reminds me of my time becoming fully enveloped in Final Fantasy X. I didn't want to dig as deep into the story as it probably deserves here, because I want this video to serve as a recommendation for players that have begun to feel as disillusioned with the genre as I have, but I do want to talk briefly about my favorite story sequence. Right before the final act, you're given a choice. You can head directly to the final fight with Lavos, or you can explore the world completely unimpeded while engaging with a slew of different side quests that reward you with some of the best gear in the game. It's best to complete all of them to make sure you're prepared for Lavos, but the real reward is the character development along the way. Each character has their own side quest that gives further insight into their backstory while providing a means of closure for each of their own inner conflicts. It's the same type of storytelling I've yet to experience in a game not belonging to the JRPG genre. The same storytelling that made me fall in love with Final Fantasy X. I dare not discuss them in detail here, because even if I came away from Chrono Trigger unengaged with the combat, the exploration, or the overall narrative, the experience would have been worth it for these moments alone. I want to reiterate just how important it was to play Chrono Trigger when I did. Not only did I come away from it with an enjoyable experience, it inspired me to play more RPGs to further discover what I've been missing. I've since picked up and completed the original Final Fantasy in just a few days, having a blast the whole way through, and I'm still just as excited to dig into more new experiences. I've come to the conclusion that Chrono Trigger is a near perfect game, at least as perfect and accessible introductory experience as it could be. Its combat and progression may not be as inventive and deep as some more recent additions to the genre, but it's equally accessible to new players of JRPGs, as it is an incredible standalone experience with immense impact and historical importance. A project born of pure passion. As Sakaguchi and Hori would describe themselves, it felt like anything was possible. We had a lot more freedom than we would with Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest. We weren't worried about the feel of the world. It would be whatever we ended up making. It was a totally new game. The production of this video would not have been possible without the help of my lovely Patreon supporters you see here on screen. If you'd like to support the channel while receiving early access to videos, as well as a bunch of extra bonus content, consider checking out my page by clicking the link on screen or in the description. I've been having a ton of fun reacquainting myself with JRPGs, so if you have any suggestions for me to play, feel free to leave a comment. If you liked the video, also consider subscribing and clicking the bell to be notified as soon as I upload a new video. It really helps expose my channel to new people so we can continue to build a great community here. Anyways, thanks once again for your support, and I can't wait to see you again in the next one.